All right. Well, we are live. So, welcome everyone as folks are starting to join us. So, if you're watching the replay, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, thank you for joining in as we are going to make 2021 the best year ever. So, this has been 2020 has certainly been a crazy year. I'm just going to share a couple things here real quick as we are getting into it. But I'm super excited that. To look at 2021 and all the opportunities ahead of itself, as well as think about 2020 and all that's kind of happened, both good and bad. And I'll share some of my results, what's worked for me, what's worked for other folks, and come up with some game plans going into 2021 to make it the best year ever. So let's go ahead and get into it. So I'm just going to share a couple things here real quick. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to share this in a group. So just bear with me here. We're going to get started here in just momentarily as folks are starting to trickle in here. And let me share this in one other place and we will start here momentarily. And also share. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into it. So if you're watching this and you can hear me, if you don't mind just clicking the little thumbs up icon. The crazy part is when we do these things, sometimes technology is great until it's not great. So I want to make sure the technology is working, and then we'll get started here momentarily as we talk about sharing some of the wins of 2020, kind of what worked, what didn't, and start focusing on 2021. So here we are as I'm recording this on, or live, I should say, I'm recording it live. We're here on New Year's Eve. So let's go ahead and get into it. So really the goal here of what I'm trying to do is just focus on the things that happened, lessons, both good and bad for 2020, and how we can, parlay that into massive growth. So as we get into this here, let me go ahead and just make this screen larger. It's been an interesting year. The nice thing is I feel like we're finishing the year on a high, at least in my niche with my products. It tends to do really well around the holiday season. This particular screenshot was from a 7-day period where it was up, 83% week over week, which is crazy because, the previous week, would have included Black Friday and Cyber Monday, but that ended up being kind of a dud. I think Amazon said they had the best Black Friday, Cyber Monday that they had ever had. I read in some article. Of course, they don't share the exact numbers, understandably. But the interesting thing is, it doesn't matter if Amazon has record sales. It really matters what do we do individually, in our own businesses. So what ends up happening is, I'm sure you can relate, is after the holiday season ends, it's kind of like the party's over. And it's like, okay, now what do we do? And so if you're saying to yourself, oh my gosh, sales are way down, well, it's normal. I feel like sales are still up than they would be. Like for me, they're up compared to what they'd be most of the year. But it's, when you start seeing numbers like that, like that's a screenshot I took from the other day where it was like 80% down week over week, which, it's just because the holiday sales are over, but it kind of feels like the party's over. And it's like, what do we do? And so what ends up happening next is, if you're like me, start thinking about, okay, what do I do next? What's kind of next up going into 2021 or the next year? Now that I've done the holiday season a few times now, but I always kind of get into this, like, get excited about all these different ideas, but then it's like confusion of like, okay, what do I do next? And so that's what we're going to get into here. But I do want to share just kind of a personal, what's the word I'm looking for? A personal, goal I had achieved a couple years ago. So I should say this is an anniversary of a milestone. So I was able to leave my job about 2 years ago. In fact, you see comments on that Instagram post from my former employer 54 weeks ago. I had left my job and to go do all this full time. And that was actually just 2 days ago. That was or no, 3 days ago would have been the anniversary of me leaving the job. And then the following day, coincidentally, was my birthday. And so it's like my birthday is kind of like my rebirth day because I became a full-time entrepreneur. And that day on my birthday 2 years ago, went and saw John Maxwell speak. And just a funny side note there, if you look at the bridge of my nose, you can kind of see a little bit of a scab in between my eyes there. The funny part is the day before, I was so excited to get going off into the wonderful world of being a full-time entrepreneur, and I was packing up my car and putting stuff in, and I actually slammed the trunk door on my nose. Like I wasn't totally moved out of the way. Like I don't know who actually does that. If you've ever done that, please feel free to leave a comment. Probably make me feel a little bit better about the fact I did that. But it has healed, but it did hurt, and it did leave a little bit of a scab there for a couple weeks. But one of the nice things was, getting to see John Maxwell speak, which was kind of interesting timing that it was like that first day as I was going in to be a full-time entrepreneur. One of the things he talked about is that everything good in life is on the other side of going uphill. So basically you have to go, he said it in his John Maxwell way. That was probably much more eloquently than what I just said there. But basically everything we want in life that's good, it's going to require a little bit of work. So we're going to have to go uphill to go get there. And this has been an interesting year because I feel like for a lot of us, and I'm sure you can relate to this, it feels like we've been going uphill quite a bit. And, oftentimes what that just means is there's a transition ahead, that there's good things in store as long as we play our cards right. And to quote another wise modern day philosopher, Tony Robbins said, basically, see it as it is. Like, look at the situation. Think of it as it is, but not worse than it is, or how you think it should be. So you don't want to think of it as it is, worse than it is, better than it is, or how you think it should be. Just really kind of understand the situation that you're confronting and what to do about it. And I think one of the nice things about the end of the year, I'm not a huge fan of, quote unquote, New Year's resolutions, but I do think there is something that's kind of like this mental starting point of like, okay, what do I do next? Because, for those of us in the e-commerce business, like I mentioned before, we're coming out of the holiday selling season and it's exciting. It's like, okay, now what do I do next? And so, the interesting thing is we got to take a good look at where are we now? What have we gone through this year? And what can we do to benefit and grow next year? Because another Tony Robbinsism, which I didn't put on the screen there, but is if you are not growing, you're dying. So let's take a quick little recap of 2020. So there's been some challenges. So I would love to hear in the comments, what are some of your challenges that you have faced this year, or, some things that, maybe have happened outside of your control. And there's been quite a few things that have happened throughout the year that have been outside of our control. I'd love to know, what are some of those things for you, but, let's talk about the big elephant in the room. There was a virus. We all know about that. Hopefully you are safe and your family and your friends are safe. And if you know of anyone that's been impacted by that, I hope they're okay. And if, it's affected you negatively or anyone, I'm sorry to hear that. But there's been like this up and down, like, the stock market, right now is doing really well. But, at one point it was like this roller coaster ride. Like at one point it was the lowest it had ever been or like the lowest drop point wise, it had ever happened in one day. And oil prices were crashing at the same time too, which is great when you're going to the pump, but there are some macroeconomic challenges with that. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average actually had its worst quarter in history for the first quarter. So there was a lot of weird stuff starting out. And then, for those of us on the Amazon side of things, In e-commerce, e-commerce had opportunity, but it also had challenges. And so, we probably all remember March and April, all of a sudden these crazy changes happening. You might have had it where all of a sudden you couldn't send inventory in for certain products, or they're very drastically limiting how much you can send in. Or you were looking at it as, okay, this is just crazy. What all's happening right now? And you might be saying to yourself, like, okay, this was nuts. Like, you might have been looking at all of a sudden. I know this was a challenge for a lot of us, is like back in, March, April, May, it was taking sometimes a month for a product to get shipped to a customer. And so, you're not getting paid when, it's in a queue to be sent out. So even though if it was Prime, some of these people were waiting like long time. So that was, people were canceling orders, or they're getting upset, or, you're just not getting paid for, longer than need be as you're waiting for these products to be shipped out. And then, here we got to the holiday season. I think I give Amazon actually a lot of kudos for kind of learning what they did in the first and second quarters of the year to really make the fourth quarter of the year go a lot more smoothly. But, one of the challenges was, I know a lot of us faced was, you have products and it's Seller Central is telling you, yeah, send in another 500 units, but then they're telling you you're several hundred units over your allotment. And it's like, this is crazy. So, I had some popular products that I probably would have even had a better year if I was able to send more of them in, but I just couldn't because the system wasn't letting me, because all of a sudden it's like, no, you've got too many in stock. And there's like, some algorithm deciding, and, there's no one that can override the algorithm, at least that I was aware of. So you may have faced those type of challenges. So lots of craziness there. And then, when we look at, what else is happening in our world, I'll take it a little bit closer to home. So basically that's time period of, late March to late April, that 30-day time period. At one point I was down 80% year over year. Some of it was, variety of things, inventory, inability to send in more units because, they were restricting inbound shipments. I actually, have products that are very giftable. And so at the time I was finding for people that if they're not going to see their friends and family, or, they're worried about, paying their bills because there's a lot of uncertainty at the time, where's all this going? Or they're not going into the office to see their coworkers, so they're less likely to buy gifts. And so I was way down. In fact, I'll just throw this out there. I had, for the first time in a long time, years since it was private label, I actually had a disbursement where I owed Amazon money for Amazon.com. I mean, that never happened. It was just kind of a perfect storm of, like I was mentioning before, this collection of orders that haven't been shipped out. So that's money that's not going into my disbursement account. People were all of a sudden getting frustrated when they were, clicking around trying to find products that maybe would arrive in less than a month, because, the wait times were quoted sometimes 4 to 6 weeks out. And so PPC all of a sudden was going through the roof. It was kind of a scary time, but, the craziness was, I ended up actually having to pay Amazon. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but, when you're used to getting substantial amounts of money and all of a sudden you owe them money, that was crazy. So I don't know if that happened to you. Hopefully it didn't. But there were some bright sides. And so one of the things was, I came to learn that the fact that I've been selling in international marketplaces was really beneficial. So selling internationally had always been, for me, generally around a 30 to 35% bump on sales. And so if you take, let's say for every $1,000 I was selling in the US, I make another $350 sales on average, between like Canada and Europe. And that was pretty nice. Now, what ended up happening is, I think some of the challenges we had in the US weren't quite as drastic in some of the other marketplaces. So just to show you here, for this time period from late March to late April, I actually had, there's 5 circles, but you can see the dots where the green line is above the blue line, that's actually where like I have an international marketplace that beat Amazon in the US. My sales outside of the US in one marketplace beat Amazon sales in the US. And so that was crazy. So what ended up happening actually was I had a 76% bump from my US sales during COVID. So it didn't totally make up for the lost sales in the US, but it sure helped. You know, when you're getting all these sales from other countries where, you know, there weren't as many challenges, there were still challenges, whatnot, but, you know, people were also buying more stuff online. There's less competition in some of these marketplaces. So I was getting a lot more sales coming in from other marketplaces. So I was growing at a much faster rate. And I was actually, the hard part with some of the other marketplaces was just having the ability to keep up, you know, stay in stock. I was having more of that issue in other marketplaces than I was in the US. And what's interesting is it wasn't just me. So this is a friend of mine, Radu. He's a 7-figure Amazon seller. So he actually had a similar situation where, you know, selling in Canada, for example, went from being about a 10 to 15% bump on his sales to even higher. He actually, it was like 25% or more. So when he added in, you know, basically Canada was another 25% on top of his US sales, and his sales in Europe ended up being about another 25%. So that's about a 50% bump on sales outside of the US. I mean, if your sales are down in the US because people aren't buying as much or for whatever reason, more than anything, the point is for a lot of us, I think whether you're doing really well during all of this or you took a hit, either way, I'm sure you could probably see that there is a need to diversify into other sales channels. Now, it hasn't been all negative. It's been positive. In fact, the international marketplaces actually, for me, became a very big part, even during peak time periods. So I actually ended up, being back to the green for growth for Q4, which was kind of like I was super excited about that because it was a little scary there for a while. So it was good to get back to growth. And it was a little nerve-wracking actually at the beginning of the holiday season, to be honest with you, because the Cyber Monday and Black Friday were a little bit of duds. So I think people are buying differently than what they were before. Let me know in the comments if that's the same way for you. But what's interesting here is I ended up, all said and done, so this is a screenshot I took on Christmas Eve. So this would have been like, that data is delayed by like a day. So let's just say it's about 30 days prior to, or going from one day prior, 30 days back from that. So a 30-day time period, I should say. My sales outside of the US ended up being a 56% bump on top of my US sales, which is substantially higher than it has been in holiday seasons before. So it would have actually been higher had I not started running out of inventory, which I'll show you why, because the growth was higher than I expected, even in some of these other marketplaces, which was great. But I'd taken a similar screenshot. If you had joined me, I did a couple weeks ago a training with the folks at Payoneer, and did another one with the Helium 10 Elite Mastermind. If you're in that, I showed a similar screenshot. At the time, I was up 65%, or I shouldn't say up 65%. I had a 65% bump in my US sales because of my international sales. So some of that I started to lose out on just because the growth was so much more anticipated. I started running out of inventory in some of my more popular products. Didn't totally run out of inventory, but started to kind of slow the machine down, so to speak, which we'll go into here in a little bit. But the US, I was at least excited to see, growth year over year. The nice thing is you'll see there, I've got, dollars versus units. So there's some growth. It did start to slow down a little bit earlier than it normally does for me, because the challenge I was running into was that some of my more popular products were starting to run out. And so was seeing growth, not huge growth, but I'll take anytime if it's going in the right direction, I'll take that, and so you can see there, when it's the year over year growth for that same 30-day time period, that's a great thing. Now you may notice those numbers are slightly different from, the last page, pretty comparable, but sometimes it's how reports pull information from one to the other. But Canada growth over a 30-day time period um, was a lot higher. So from a unit standpoint, it was up 26% year over year and up 45% year over year because of the actual sales dollars. Now, one thing just to note there on the sales dollars, that's in Canadian dollars. So it's not apples to apples compared to US dollars, but it's still, that's nice. I'll take it all day long to have, that's probably, let's say 16,000 ish US dollars. That's money, sales coming in that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And so you can see there it starts to taper off when you look at the graph there towards the end of the holiday season, because I was starting to run out of inventory of some popular products. And so that's, ends up being a problem. But, when you've got, decent sized growth, that ends up happening. And then looking in the UK is great. Definitely had some growth. UK is one of those countries, if you're not in, I would definitely recommend considering it, especially if you're already in Canada. And I'll get more into why I think Canada is a great country to start it here in a little bit. But the interesting thing is with the UK, same kind of thing where units are at an increased percentage, but then it's the growth of actual sales, not dollars. There it's pounds, but in the currency is up at a higher amount than units. And some of that was because I was able to charge a little bit more this year. Didn't seem to phase people at all. Hence they're buying more stuff at a higher price. And then some of the mix was people were buying higher priced items too. So that was a interesting note. Same thing with Canada. If you notice that in the other slide, it really kind of the same thing with the US, just not as big of growth numbers, but you can see, very substantial double-digit year-over-year growth, both in Canada and the UK. It's great. They're going through a lot of challenges, which as we record this on December 31st, there's a lot of things will hit tomorrow, which will end up being, I think, a little bit of a ready, fire, aim. There'll be a lot of kind of figuring it out after the fact. So, but I wouldn't let that deter you from potentially going there, because it could be a great way to, add some additional sales to your bottom line. Now, if you're in all of not Germany, if you're in Germany and the rest of Europe, and the UK and Canada, you might want to consider Australia. The numbers aren't huge, but I think there's a lot of potential there. And so you can see there, like year over year, and I was there for the holiday season last year, but my year over year was like 1,000% growth. Now you can see those aren't huge numbers by any stretch of the imagination, but I've been noticing over the course of the year, my disbursements are just, they're gradually getting a little bit bigger each time. And so, I had for the first time ever, a disbursement that was over 1,000 Australian dollars recently, which was nice. And so again, that's Australian dollars, so it's not quite the same, but that might be, $1,700 US. No, probably maybe not quite that. Let's say 15 or 1,600. I'm kind of doing the math in my head, which could be totally off, so don't quote me there. But the nice thing is Australia is fairly new, so people are still adapting to using Amazon in Australia. I do think COVID has helped kind of accelerate that. eBay had always kind of been the 800-pound gorilla in the room, so to speak, in Australia. And so Amazon's starting to eat into eBay's market share there. And so, I wouldn't say that should be your first stop internationally, but as a long-term play, that's definitely one to think about. Is, it's heading in the right direction. So you can see there how the growth is not quite as much with dollars to units as it is to the other marketplaces. But when you're still talking about 750 to 1,000% growth, that's pretty darn good growth. I'll take that all day long, even if some of the growth is from products that maybe were a little bit not as expensive, or the mix of products or some products that aren't quite as expensive as the ones from last year. So, I will definitely take that all year long. So next up, you might be saying to yourself, okay, but is now a good time to start selling internationally? And, you know, could you have missed some of the, if you're not selling in international marketplaces, or maybe you're in one, but you want to go into some more, you might be saying to yourself, yeah, but did I miss the boat? People are going to keep buying stuff is the way I look at it. Like, I don't see, even, let's say we get back to quote unquote normal, after things are, whenever that is with COVID, I think people's buying habits are going to be a lot different. The thought of getting in a car and driving a half hour to a store, especially when you think about the mall, and fighting crowds, and finding a parking space, and trying to remember, like, with the store you're trying to go to, where is it versus the entrance you're coming in, and all this, like, it could be this big production of an hour or two to go buy a simple thing. Or you can go on your phone, press a button, you don't get the item instantly, but you can check it off mentally in your list, which I think is what people really want, and it just magically arrives to your door a day or two later. And when you think about that, and that's happening pretty much across the world, why wouldn't you, want to add that too? So there's that saying you've probably heard: the best time if you wanted shade to have planted a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So now is always a good time. And so I think in general, one of the things this year has definitely taught us is that when we're looking at other marketplaces, or just other ways to diversify, we got to look at ways to cast a wider net. And so, when you think of it, if you're trying to catch more fish, you want to catch more fish, you got to cast a wider net. And I think for a while there was this kind of belief of, like, just go all in on Amazon, all in on Amazon, all in on Amazon, which I think is great, to focus your efforts on where you understand. But it was like, just focus on Amazon.com. I remember kind of fairly early on, I was in a mastermind. It was led by someone who said, you shouldn't even be thinking about international marketplaces until you are, farther along. Well, I'm glad I didn't listen to that advice, because it's worked out well for me. And I think it's probably one of the things that was a contributing factor to me being able to leave my job. And it's continued to be even more of a beneficial factor in my business than it was a while back. And so, as you're thinking about ways of casting a wider net, oftentimes we think about, okay, well, what about some of these other sales channels? And some of these aren't even in business, but, like, Sears, believe it or not, is something people actually talked about in 2015, 2016, when I was starting to get into this game. But then they just slowly started not taking on new sellers and things like that. And I can't even tell you the last time I heard someone talk about buying something on Sears. I don't even know if Sears.com is there. Jet.com got sunsetted earlier this year, so it kind of got absorbed by Walmart. Walmart's great. Walmart's a good long-term play. I did get my first sale this holiday season on Walmart, so I'm not anti-Walmart. In fact, as I record this today, I had a podcast episode. I interviewed a gentleman who is a Walmart expert. And so, that's definitely something I think consider listening to. But the thing about all of these other, whether there are other marketplaces, or let's say you got a Shopify store, and in your Shopify store, you're trying to figure out, like, how to send traffic, or if you're on other marketplaces, you're trying to figure out a new algorithm, a new set of expectations, expectations from the company, expectations from their customers. You got to have new fulfillment channels. Everything is different. And so you got to ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze? Whereas for a lot of folks, their sales in Canada will exceed their sales, on Amazon in Canada will exceed their sales on Walmart in the US. Not to say don't do Walmart in the US, but just as you're starting to think about, like, okay, you only got so much time in a day, what channels are coming up for you? What are you going to add to the mix? So just some food for thought there. One little analogy I like to give is, I used to kind of think of Amazon in terms of like the Oregon Trail. So I'm going to date myself. I remember playing this game. You might remember this game. It was like, we literally had like floppy disks, like the kind that are floppy, and have to switch them out like midway through the game on like this old Apple IIe computer. But basically the gist of this game was you were supposed to go from start to finish, which was, I think you started in Kansas and you finished in Oregon. So you started in the middle of the country in the US and going all the way out to the West Coast. And along the way, you're supposed to hunt, and hopefully you don't get cholera or other diseases you probably never heard of before or since. But bottom line, you and the people in your group, you don't want to die. You want to make it to the end. So it was really kind of this kind of the mentality of the game is get from point A to point B, and don't lose out on the challenges along the way. It was a fun game, but I don't think entrepreneurship is quite as much about like going from point A to point B quite so linear as I used to, that I've come to learn. It's more like these games like SimCity and Minecraft, which now my kids are addicted to. But it's these games where you're kind of building your own little empire. And so in business, it's kind of like you're building your own little empire, and you just keep expanding and adding on new things. You add new products, you add new marketplaces, you add new channels, you add all these different things, new keywords, new campaigns, you adding all these things to make your business more valuable, to bring in more sales, more cash flow, and more profits. That's the goal, right? And I truly believe selling internationally is one of the things that gives you the chance to expand your empire. So I personally recommend, which I kind of hinted at previously, was if you've not already, start in Canada. And if you're not already in Canada, it's something definitely to consider. It's, one of those things that Canada is a great marketplace. This is a picture. It's not meant to be political in any way, shape, or form, but the gentleman there on the left shaking hands with the Amazon associate is the Prime Minister of Canada. So clearly, Canada must be pretty favorable to Amazon when you got the Prime Minister visiting an Amazon fulfillment center. And yes, they do have fulfillment centers there in Canada. And they do FBA there, just like they do here in the States. And one of the reasons why I suggest selling in Canada is actually a few different reasons. One is you really do have a less competition. Some of that is there's some hoops you have to jump through in the front end, which we'll go over here in a moment. But the nice thing is it's an English speaking country. And so, unlike if you go to Japan, if you go on Amazon Japan, you got to, convert your listings over to Japanese. And there's actually like 4 different versions of Japanese that you probably should use. And couldn't even pretend to tell you how to pronounce the different versions, but there's, different ways people might use Japanese, different alphabets. So you have to almost touch on all of those. And there's people that can help you with that. But, I think start off in the English speaking marketplaces first. And then, one of the things is, in addition to the language being for the most part English, the culture is very similar to the US. And I've never quite seen the exact statistic, but it's anywhere between 75 and 90%. I've seen fairly reliable sources say that is what that's what the population of Canada that lives within 100 miles of the US border is. So for the most part, they live pretty close to the US when you think of it that way. And so folks in Canada, they tend to buy things and have similar tastes to what folks in America do. So if you're doing well on Amazon in the US, your chances of success on Amazon Canada, for the most part, are pretty darn good. And the inventory logistics are, for the most part, I would say simplest with Canada to any other marketplace, because you can just take a little bit of what you have in the States and just ship it up there. I'm oversimplifying it, but I know that sometimes we tend to overcomplicate things in our head. And the sales tax is pretty similar to how it works in the US, except I think even better. And when I say similar, it's because it's added on top of the selling price. It's not included in the selling price. So like in Europe, it's going to get even more complex here after January 1st with some of the changes, which I don't think are bad long term, but it's just going to be interesting because in Europe, you really have to watch out in your margins from your selling price, which you don't have to worry about that in Canada because, depending on where the person lives, their sales tax could be a little bit higher. But I find actually the sales tax in Canada is simpler than it is in the US from the standpoint of trying to figure it out. Because for the most part, it's just one place you're registering and filing with. Um, and then, one of the nice things too is they do have sponsored ads there. And you might be saying, well, is that a benefit? Well, some of these newer marketplaces that, you might get emails from Amazon almost daily. Some of those marketplaces don't even have sponsored ads yet. So, really more the point with that is Canada is a very mature marketplace. It's well established. People buy stuff a lot in Amazon in Canada, and they love buying it. I think Canadians, just like they have similar buying preferences, they also love their Prime, just like Americans do. Um, and so, when you look at the two countries, the population is a little bit more than 10% of the US population. So when you think about it, if the population is roughly 10%, it would make sense that you could expect 10 to 15%, which oftentimes, like I said, for myself, it's even higher. And has been consistently all year long. But even if you said, you just want to be conservative and say, 10% of whatever your products you send up there, what potential sales could be looking at? 10% is a good benchmark number to gauge success off of. I'd say that. And, the currency, it's not the same. They call it the dollar, but it's still, you got to watch out for differences in pricing. And then, you could end up being responsible for GST, which I think really for everybody, there's no reason not to register there. And the nice thing is you get credits for your GST, HST. So it kind of acts as a hybrid between US sales tax and how that works in Europe, except simpler. And so that's the nice part, I think. And then after Canada, you can rinse and repeat. You learn, you get comfortable, you start maybe trying out Europe or Japan, Australia, or some of these other marketplaces like Singapore and UAE, the places Amazon's starting to go into and they're getting excited about. And so there's a lot you could do with that. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, okay, this sounds all well and good, but, is Kevin and the only person who's, doing well at this, selling in international marketplaces? Well, this is Annie. She's a client. I actually have a done for you service. So I help folks get launched into other marketplaces. If that sounds like something you're interested in, feel free to send me a direct message. We could potentially work out a time to chat to see if it would make sense for you. If it does, great. If not, no worries. It seems like when I do these type of Facebook Live, somebody will end up messaging me wanting to know more information. If that's you, great. But Annie is someone who, she had said that she had left a lot of money on the table and that she had wished she had done it earlier. In fact, if you want to hear more about her story, she was actually 2 weeks ago on the podcast. So you can go listen to that in the Maximizing E-commerce podcast. This is Lavelia Paget. She and her husband, they're successful 7-figure Amazon sellers. And Canada's gotten to the point for them, they were doing about 500 to 100 units a day in Canada. And that's additional sales they're getting that they wouldn't have gotten if they didn't, get registered in Canada and send some inventory up there. And so that's super exciting for them. I think for them, it's about a 25%, if I remember correctly from their story, of what their US sales are. They're getting an additional 25% in Canada, and they're getting similar numbers in Europe too. So, I mean, it's like when you start adding these up, like I was talking about, like before, like, things like SimCity and Minecraft, and you just keep building on your empire. You literally can do that when you're selling in other marketplaces. So as you're thinking about going into 2021, that's definitely something to keep on your radar. And then this here is James. James is someone who, he and I were corresponding, and this is even before COVID and all that's happened, where he was telling me that, when he compared his sales year over year, that through the totality of last year being 2019, since there's still a few more hours, so I can still call 2019 last year. But for the whole year, he did about 34.77%. And, the nice thing is, what a lot of people tend to find is when they're selling in another marketplace like Canada, they're not doing all these giveaways and launches and all these other things. It's kind of like, for the most part, PPC and go. And, I never want to say something is totally passive because it's not that way. But it's almost like on autopilot, and, you just keep feeding it. And, I check my PPC especially outside of the holiday season, I probably check it in Canada once every 3 or 4 months. I kind of got it up and running. It just kind of runs itself. There's not as many competitors. The competitors aren't doing as aggressive tactics like they do in the States. So it literally just kind of almost runs on autopilot. And so the challenge, though, is if you want to sell on Amazon in Canada, there are hoops you have to jump through. And so once you're set up and running, it's kind of like it's on autopilot. But the challenge with that is you might be saying to yourself, okay, that's great. I want to do this. But it can be scary, trying to figure out all these things. And so, there's forms you got to fill out, and they're complicated. And like the form you got to fill out, it's like, to get into Canada, it's like 13 pages, and there's a lot that applies. There's a lot that doesn't apply. A lot of it is in, their own legalese in Canada, the English speaking country, but the terms they use are different. So it's like, how do you know? But the nice thing is, I've gotten to do this in my own business. So I've, done it as well as helped other folks out, both in, my done for you service. I, have a course where I help people with that, as well as, I've got this video. So actually, if you look on, the YouTube, if you look on YouTube and you type in, at least it was for me, how to sell on Amazon Canada. So I looked it up incognito mode earlier today. My video there, how to sell on Amazon.ca from the USA, which the logistics work pretty much from other countries. But that was the #2 video. It gets good engagement, a lot of great questions people ask in the comments there. And, one of the things about that video is, both, with that video, and then just when people sometimes will send me, emails or direct messages, the question that keeps coming up over and over again is people just get very nervous about the form I was telling you about, like, getting registered, wanting to make sure that you're checking off the right boxes and they're not doing things, that are going to hurt themselves. And so, I think there's an opportunity to help people more with a solution like that. And so, I was thinking what I'd like to do is host a workshop. Now, the challenge is, unfortunately, can't do in-person workshops like we once did, not that long ago. And the challenge is too, even if I did an in-person workshop here in kind of the outskirts of suburban West Palm Beach, Florida, I guess you could call it, there's only so many people that would even be in my area. So I'm thinking about, nothing's set in stone, doing a live virtual workshop. It'd be live, and we literally would go, through the form. I've spent plenty of time on the, filling out these forms for folks. I know what works for Amazon sellers. And, wouldn't be giving tax advice, of course, but if you needed someone to answer, some of the more particular advice, I can have good resources for you to go to, people that actually can, or, qualified tax professionals. But as far as like getting registered, it's a process. And once you've been through it before, it's not as scary. And once you get to that other end, then you start finding like, okay, I'm getting those sales. And so if you're saying to yourself, like, okay, that'd be interesting potentially, it's going to be sometime in January, is what I'm targeting, putting together a workshop, a virtual workshop, and talking about, how to expand into Amazon in Canada, and, basically walk you through the blueprint, answer your questions, but walk you through step by step how to fill out the registrations so that you can send it in and make sure that you're doing everything compliantly. And so, if this sounds like something you're interested in, potentially, no obligations, but I am setting up I'm calling it a waiting list, and you'd have first crack at access before the rest of the public does, as well as I will have some early bird discounts specifically for people that sign up through this list. And so if you go to maximizingecommerce.com/fast, as in fast track workshop. So maximizingecommerce.com/fast. You can sign up on the waiting list, no obligations. And, you'll be on the list, and we will contact you when we have more dates available. And if it sounds like it's a win-win for you, you'd even have special pricing. And I will make sure this is definitely something that's very affordable. I want it to be something that helps more sellers access Canada and the benefits of selling in Canada, because I think it's one of the best places to start out at. It's one of the easiest ones to manage long term. And I think the results really just continue to get better and better. And the more I compare notes with folks, it really is one of those things where they're saying, like, okay, Canada is becoming a much better country to sell in than I originally thought. And so, again, no obligation, but if this sounds like something you're interested in, simply go to maximizingecommerce.com/fast, and you can sign up for the waiting list. And so I'm going to kick it back over here to myself and put myself back here on the screen. And I'm going to open it up to if you have any questions. So if you have any questions, doesn't have to be about the workshop. It could be about anything. But if you have questions about something you would like answered, going into 2021, what should you do? What have you learned? What is going to be beneficial for you? I would love to hear it from you. So you can simply put that into the comments, and we can definitely chat through that there. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section there. So, but as we're going through all this, it's interesting that, this has been such a crazy year. And I love the fact that, we get a day like today to kind of settle down. One of the reasons why I decided to do this today was because one, it helps me kind of flesh out my idea here and see if this is something folks would be potentially interested in. But at the same time too, it kind of gets us ahead of the game. And I think for those of you who are watching this, I want to commend you for being on this live and getting your mindset into what can I do to move forward next year. Because I think far often at almost 3:00 in the afternoon Eastern time, wherever it is for you, everyone's kind of thinking about their New Year's Eve plans. Now, I'm sure for the most part, people aren't necessarily going out right now. It's one of those things we're just kind of thinking like, okay, what am I doing tonight? Am I going to watch the ball drop? Am I going to watch Ryan Seacrest or whatever people do on New Year's Eve? But we're in an exciting time period. And so again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments down below, whether you are on YouTube or on Facebook, and we can definitely answer those questions for you. If you're watching this in the replay, I'll do my best to go back and answer some of those questions for you. And they could be about anything, that you're thinking of. And, one of the things I think is so awesome about being in the entrepreneurial space is we get the opportunity to really plan out and chart our own course. And so it's been interesting because, a lot of industries have been hit really hard. And so, yeah, my business took a bit of a beating with the physical product side of things earlier this year. It's recovered. But the thing of it is, we get to pick our course of where we want to go. In fact, I remember last year going to a New Year's Eve party with my wife and kids, and there was a couple other families there, and there's just one couple, and both of them, husband and wife, both of them were pilots for a major air carrier. And once upon a time I had a dream of being a pilot. My wife, on my 40th birthday, a couple years back, 4 years back, it's hard to believe how, yeah, well, 44 now. Anyway, total side note. My wife had gotten me a, introductory flight lesson because she knows something I wanted to do. And, talking to them, this couple, and thinking about like, okay, wow, they make good money. They get to travel, the world, both for work and, free or low price travel for, themselves and their family. Like what a life, I wouldn't want to have that schedule. But I just remember thinking like, wow, that'd be great. Like, in some ways it was kind of one of those moments where the grass is greener on the other side. Well, fast forward to today. One of them is on furlough and has been for months. One of them, I think he was furloughed. I think she's currently furloughed. He's, um, was maybe for a while. He had kind of a cushier pilot job, I think, like in the simulators, doing training and whatnot. But now he's like back to flying, which I think he's happy to do that. But I don't think his hours have been cut, so I don't think he's earning anywhere near what he was earning before. So just think about yourself, and what is the benefit of being able to decide where am I going in my business, and being able um to decide and not have to wait for someone else. I was talking to, I used to work in, you know, tourism and convention business. And I was talking to somebody who was an executive at a company I worked for. I don't want to say who it was because this was a private conversation, but he was basically talking about how, cause he left that world, to, become more entrepreneurial. Um, and that was a few months back. Or a couple of years back, I should say. But it was a few months ago, he and I were talking, and there's just something about not having to wait for someone else to decide when you can make changes. You don't have to go to the board of directors. You don't have to go to someone else and say, okay, this is what I want to do. You can just decide and start implementing it tomorrow. And so I think that's one of the awesome things about being in our world. And so got a question here from Marcia. I'm new to this, so sorry. Never apologize, because the way I would say something like this is we are all learning. But do you or your company help other companies sell on Amazon? We went with another company last May, but it's not going well. Even taking COVID into consideration, we sold a little in Canada last year and have items in FBA right now, but not really selling well. Can you help with that? So, yeah, interesting thing is I have two niches. I would say my two niches for the most part. The one I talk more about publicly is the expanding into other marketplaces, and I definitely help people with that, as well as the other one is helping brands and e-commerce store owners that, maybe they're seven figures off Amazon, but they're, hardly sell anything on Amazon, which if you sell on Amazon, you might think, isn't it usually the other way around? But I know examples of companies that, maybe they just started in e-commerce in 2003, did really well with like Google SEO, and now they're moving on. So I don't know exactly what your situation is, but it sounds like you're kind of actually in both camps. So I'd be more than happy to chat with you. So if you send me a message, either send me a direct message here in Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're at, or you can email hello@maximizingecommerce.com. I might even be able to throw that on here. Do I have that on here? Or just email Kevin@maximizingecommerce.com, and that will work. And then I'd be more than happy to chat with you, see if, something we can do to help you out, point you in the right direction at minimum, or, maybe there's something I can do to help you. And then as far as, for those of you who are watching, if you are thinking about expanding into Canada and you are interested in coming to that workshop, if you go to maximizingecommerce.com/fast, that will be the wait list you can go to sign up and get exclusive access to that. Just because the interesting thing is, as we start moving into next year, you know, you can get up and running, but what I want to do is save you for the time and effort trying to figure it all out. Because I've come to learn in my business, it's better to find people who are experts who can help me and point me in the right direction, even if I have to pay a little bit for it, than to try to figure it all on my own. Because the most valuable resource we'll never get more back of is time. And so, here we are, 2020 is almost over. And so it went by like that. I don't know if you feel that way, but I definitely feel that way, that it went by quick. And Marcia says, okay, thank you. Yeah. So I look forward to speaking with you soon, Marcia. And if anyone else has questions or comments, feel free to leave them in um, the comment section down below, whether it's almost always down below, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook, whether you're in my Facebook group or you're on YouTube, feel free to leave a question. I'll be more than happy to answer it. If you're watching this in a future time period, again, I will be more than happy to go back and answer some of those questions as well. And if you were thinking about starting on Amazon in Canada and you don't want to have to deal with figuring out all of the front end stuff, I do have a workshop that's coming up. Don't have a date set up, just kind of gauging people's interest, but you can sign up for exclusive early bird discounts on that, as well as some additional resources and tools and whatnot by going to maximizingecommerce.com/fast. I want to keep it to a relatively small, it'll be a live virtual workshop. That way I can answer people's questions. Everyone will be able to get their questions answered and do it in a way that, gets you up and running faster and that you're not having to spend all this time. Like I remember spending months of time trying to figure it out. And I've spent more hours on the phone with the Canadian Revenue Agency than I can chat or that I can add up in my head, dealing it both in my own business and then also helping out many of the clients I've worked with as well. So it's one of those things that, if I can help you out, it would be awesome. So looks like we got another question here. I'm Canadian, thinking about selling in UK or Europe. Will you have a workshop on that? Potentially. So if you are thinking about selling in the UK, although I don't have a workshop planned just yet, I probably will once the dust kind of settles on that, to have something that's kind of a DIY thing, but I still help people in my done for you service. I still take on new clients with that. If I'm in the trenches doing it for them, I'm more comfortable because I can help them as they figure out all the changes. So if you want, you can go to email me. You can send me a direct message, or where is my email address? Kevin@maximizingecommerce.com. Shoot me an email. I'd be more than happy to set up a free strategy session to see about pointing in the right direction. If you're looking at Europe, and it'd probably be beneficial for me too, just to see what additional questions people have for Europe. But I love the fact you're asking the question about, will there be a workshop on that? So I plan to do something in the year once the dust is settled. But as far as I'm still taking on clients for the European marketplace. So if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in. This is an exciting time as we're heading into 2021. I think I tend to be very optimistic. And again, I hope you are too, going into the new year. It's like new year, new you. I actually just joined a gym yesterday. So I wanted to make sure to do that before the new year, so I wasn't one of those people that joined it on the new year. So, but the interesting thing is, if you are curious about joining the Fast Track workshop, you can get on the waiting list. There's absolutely no obligation in joining the waiting list, but you will get you will get first access, I should say. For free, you'll get first access to purchasing a ticket, and you'll also be able to purchase it at an early bird discount. And that will help me gauge, kind of what that's for. And I want to keep it small. So having first access to it, if it ends up selling out, you would end up having first access. So, when I do open it to the public, you would have already gotten your ticket secured and at a lower price. And right now, all you're doing is just saying, I'm raising my hand to say I'm potentially interested. Looks like I got another question here. What is your company called on Amazon? What do you sell? So that is a question. That's a great question. I tend to keep that one a little bit more private, just because I've tend to find when you put it out there, you start inviting copycats. I'd be more than happy to go into a little bit more depth on that if we're chatting on the phone or through Zoom, tell you a little bit more about kind of what I do. but I try to keep the specifics of the products I sell publicly a little more quiet. And if you're still fairly new to the Amazon space, believe it or not, that's actually something a lot of people are concerned about. Just because if you say, hey, I sell this, and people are like, oh, you must be doing fairly well, then they start, it kind of adds copycats. So looks like you, based on the smiley face, get where I'm coming from. So again, if you are interested in potentially being part of that fast track workshop for selling in Canada, just go to maximizingecommerce.com/fast. And thank you for joining me. And, again, kudos to you for being on this, this live as we're talking about 2020, because again, far too many people can just put their feet up this week between Christmas and New Year's and say, figure it out come Monday. So it's like January 4th turns into the 5th and 6th. And it's like a week into January before they really start thinking about what they're going to do in their business. So the fact that you are here, I think says a lot. And so kudos to all of you. David wanted to say good info. Have a great New Year. Same to you. Thank you, David. Sheila, thanks. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you. And Marcia, Happy New Year. And thank you. So yes, thank you to everyone for joining me again on this. And I wish you all the best in your e-commerce journey. And for those of you who are watching the replay, thank you for making it all the way through to the end of the replay. And I hope you do well and everyone crushes it in 2021. So thanks so much, guys. Take care.